Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, and where we're going in life, so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Wood podcast, episode 395. This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. Today, I'm going to talk about quitting. How to know when to quit your adventures. Now, this is a topic that was inspired by a run I did last week when I almost quit halfway through. But then I didn't, and of course, I was really glad I didn't quit. But my mindset took a dip in a way I hadn't experienced before on long runs. So I wanted to not only analyze the situation for me so I can deal with this in the future, but also to help you think about when to quit your adventures, because sometimes quitting is appropriate. So last week I planned to go on a 40-kilometer run and ended up doing 42 kilometers for various reasons. First of all, I got sort of lost. I missed a turnoff and I ended up kind of taking a detour, a spontaneous detour, and then I took a conscious detour when I got to a point in the trail that was absolutely flooded and I had no desire to run in water that would have been up beyond my ankles. So those extra 2 kilometers meant that I actually ran a marathon. Of course, it wasn't a race, it was just me on my own, but I ran 42 kilometers or 26.2 miles. Which is an iconic distance, and it felt really good to have completed that. The run started out really well. It was a trail that I had hiked many times, but I hadn't walked it in a long time, so it was really nice to run it. I had never run parts of this trail before, but I was familiar with it, which makes it extra confusing as to how I missed that turnoff. But anyway, it was lovely. It was a beautiful day. It wasn't raining. Little droplets fell at one point, kind of a light mist, but it was mostly dry. The sky was dry. The trails were not. It was really, which made the trail extra hard. Now, I know I've been complaining about mud pretty much every time I leave my house and go on a trail, but the fact is, mud is very tiring. Couldn't run the whole way through. There were points where I had to slow down and walk, but even though I was walking really, really slowly because the mud was so slippery. So the mud made the trail extra hard. So again, I got lost at one point, had to take a detour, made another detour. I knew that was going to add about 2 kilometers to the route, but I was fine with that. I actually took that in stride pretty well, which was a good thing to note, because I realized that at these longer distances, an extra 2 kilometers isn't that big a deal, even though I was already jumping 10% over my previous long run, which had been 36 kilometers. So I'd gone from 36 to 40, and this was going to be 42. Still, I felt fine about that. That wasn't really the problem. But at some point, halfway through the first stage of my run, I don't know, I just started to feel tired. I knew I hadn't slept well the night before, and it was wasn't really enjoying it. And I started thinking, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I love running, but if I don't love running, should I really do it? And I knew the aid station was coming up. So my husband and I, when we do our longer runs, or when he does his longer runs, better said, I crew for him. So I create a route for him, and I set up stages where I'll meet him with the car, and I'll have hot drinks and cold drinks and snacks, and kind of serves as a base where he can fuel up and then keep going. So that's what I've been doing for him on his longer runs. This was the first time he had done the same for me. I had been doing all of my previous runs self-supported. probably could have done this run self-supported, but I really thought it would make it easier to have him help me halfway through. It did, and it didn't. So it was really helpful to have that aid station where I had hot drinks and cold drinks and snacks, but I realized that it was also a good excuse to quit because I knew I was going to see him at the 20-kilometer point. And as I was approaching that point, I was really tired and the trail was starting to get a little more challenging. And I started thinking, oh, I don't want to be doing this. Maybe I could just meet him and then go home. Then I can just do this long run next week. I'll give it another try next week. So when I met him, he was like really excited. He was cheering me on. He was taking pictures and taking videos. And as soon as he stopped videoing, I said, I think I'm going to go home. He was like, oh, what's going on? And I said, I don't know. I'm just not feeling it. I'm not having a good time. I'm not enjoying it. And he said, well, that's okay. Let's just go to the car and you can have some hot coffee and you can have some snacks and then we'll see. And so I actually spent about 20 minutes at the car. I was really planning. I was not planning to go on. But we got to the car and he started filling up my water bottle and he started filling up my Tailwind and my other bottle. And I said to him, you're acting as though I'm going to go back out. And I don't think I am. And he was like, that's okay. Let's just do this. So if you do decide to go back out, you're ready. And the whole time I'm thinking there's no way I'm going back out. But I had some hot coffee, I had some water, I had some malt loaf, which is something that I really crave when I run. It's a really good snack after a long run. And I had a mandarin orange, and I still really didn't want to go back out. And so he's sitting there with me and he's like, I really don't know what to do because you didn't prepare me for this. And I was like, how am I supposed to prepare you? And he was like, well, you didn't tell me in the morning what are the guidelines for quitting? And I was like, because I didn't think I was going to quit this morning. I thought I was going to run. And he said to me, well, let's backtrack to this morning. And if I asked you, what are the appropriate conditions for quitting? What would they be? And I said, well, if I'm injured or if I've got a really bad pain that indicates an injury. And he said, you have either of those? And I was like, no. So I guess I'm going back out then. And I did. But it really helped me to think about those questions. And it was like the second I realized what my personal guidelines were for quitting, I realized that I had no choice but to go back out because I wasn't hurting. I mean, I was tired, my legs were tired, but it wasn't that big a deal. By no means was I injured, nor was I heading towards an injury. So what we did was we changed the game plan. So we'd originally planned to have one aid station, but we ended up adding a second one really close to home, just about 6 kilometers before the end of the route. And he met me there again. I had hot coffee, I had snacks, and then I left. And what he did without telling me was he met me on the trail just before the extra aid station that we had planned. And he ran with me towards it. And then he met with me towards the last part of my run. Now I don't know why I planned it this way, but I planned for the route to end at the top of Box Hill, which is one of the highest hills in my area. Don't know why. Don't know why I thought that was a good idea, but I did. So he met me at the base of Box Hill. We went up Box Hill together. I was using my poles. That really helped. And then we ran the last couple of kilometers together. So that was really, really helpful. So inspired by that story, I wanted to help you figure out in advance how to know when to quit your adventures, because I think this is one of the things where if you plan it in advance, you know what your guidelines are and you can get yourself out of that low place much faster. I was so happy that I finished. I was so happy that I kept going. I was so happy that I worked through that low point or ate through that low point and got back on the trail. Now, I know in ultra running, there are highs and there are lows, and that if you're going to get through the lows, you need to just keep going and then they'll go away. It's not like they get worse and worse and worse and then you implode. You start to feel better. So I knew all this, and yet I really went through that low point and thought about quitting. So how can you learn when to quit your adventures? So the short answer to this is you can quit whenever you want to. It's your adventure. You say when to go. You say when to stop. You can do whatever you want. However, you might not be so satisfied with yourself at the end of the day if you quit and you realized you could have gone on. maybe you wanted to go on. Maybe you feel disappointed that you didn't go on. So having these guidelines in advance will help you understand whether it's right to quit or not. And right meaning right for you, not right based on what you think you should do. So I mentioned this experience in my Facebook group in Holly's Grove, which is my new Facebook group for clients and readers only. And someone in there said, it can be important to give yourself the option to quit. Because once you give yourself the option to quit, then it's possible to find out whether we actually want to quit or not. And I think that's a really good point. Sometimes you don't even give yourself the option to quit and you just suffer through it. But once you say, look, I could quit anytime, but I choose not to, or I choose to quit. But if you choose not to quit and you recognize that it's a conscious choice not to quit, then I think that makes it easier to keep going and to work through that low point. So I think one of the places to start with is, again, know your why. Know your why for this particular adventure and always go back to this. And I have an episode about knowing your why for your outdoors adventures, and that's episode 382. I will link to that in the show notes. But go back to your why. Why are you doing this particular adventure? And I don't mean this particular sport or this particular activity, but this day's adventure, why are you doing it? So for me, for my 42-kilometer run, I was training for my ultra. I have an ultra, a 50K in April that I hope will go ahead. I was originally planning to walk it. Now I'm planning to run it. I've now committed in my mind to running it. So I had to run 42 kilometers at some point because that's part of my training plan so that I can run 50K. So I was going to do it at some point. And yes, I want to enjoy my runs. And yes, I usually enjoy my runs, but I also know it's not going to be easy. So I recognize the fact that my runs aren't always going to be a bucket of joy. Sometimes there's going to be low points. So yes, one of my whys for running is joy because it brings me joy, but I know it's not like nonstop joy. So I think that's another important thing to point out because that was one of the things that my mindset was using to trip me up as I was approaching my aid station. I run because I enjoy it. If I'm not enjoying it, why am I doing it? And I think that's, again, an important thing to point out. It's not going to be 100% joy every minute of the run, especially when you're doing these longer distances. So go back to your why. Know your why for this particular adventure. I was training, had to do it sometime, may as well do it today, especially since I wasn't injured or heading towards an injury. So what are the questions that you need to ask yourself before you go? I think the first question is, under what conditions would I feel okay quitting? So for me, that was injury or pain that felt like it was leading to an injury. But for you, you might have other parameters. You might want to quit if you've got an excess of blisters or if you're feeling totally exhausted. Find out what conditions would make you feel okay quitting. Next question, how will you feel if you quit today? So that was one of the things that my husband asked me. It was like, well, if you don't go on and you quit, how are you going to feel? And at the time when I was in the middle of my low spot, I was like, I'll feel fine because I'll just do the run next week. And he goes, would you really feel fine? I was like, yes, I'd feel fine. I'll just do it later. But I think deep down a part of me realized that I wouldn't feel okay about it if I quit. I would have been disappointed in myself, even if I decided to do the run at a later date. I wouldn't have felt okay about quitting. But ask yourself, how will I feel if I quit today? Are you going to be happy with that? Are you going to be disappointed in yourself? Are you going to be, upset with yourself in some way because you quit? Or will you be absolutely fine with it? And how will you feel if you quit because of a specific reason? So how will you feel if you quit because you're injured? That's a very different situation. If you're injured, it's a good thing to quit. So you'll probably feel satisfied with yourself for not making an injury worse. How will you feel if you quit because you've got pain? Be that a headache or shoulder pain or something like that. How will you feel if you quit because you have blisters? How will you feel if you quit because you're tired? So kind of evaluate all of these different things that could go wrong or discomforts and think about how you would feel if you quit because of that specific reason. And that can help you decide whether those conditions are adequate or satisfactory conditions for quitting. And you use these questions, your answers to these questions, to create your own set of guidelines. So for me, it's injury or major pain. For you, it might be something else. figure out what your boundaries are in terms of what you want to experience on your outdoors adventures and what you're willing to experience in order to stretch yourself and stretch your limits and take your adventures to the next level. Also, I think it's important to have a series of scaled goals for your adventure. And this is something that I did not have. And this is something that my husband reminded me of that would be good to have when we were on the first aid station. So he said, why don't you just finish, even if you have to walk? And I was like, because that doesn't count to me. And he was like, well, but it's valuable because it would still give you time on feet. And I was like, yeah, but that doesn't count to me. And so he said, well, what does count? And I said, well, finishing running. And he was like, okay, could you run for a bit and walk for a bit? And I was like, not really. That wouldn't satisfy me either. So that also helped me to understand what satisfied my goal and what didn't. But it can be useful to have a series of scaled goals. So I could have said, okay, my goal is to run these 42 kilometers. Next goal, if I can't run the 42 kilometers, my goal is to run the first half and walk the second half. Another scale goal could be my goal is to run what I can and just walk when I can't. So you can come up with a set of different versions of your goal for that particular adventure. And it's also helpful to come up with a plan B, something that's somewhere between your original goal and quitting. So again, for me, that could have been finishing the miles walking. It could have been finishing the miles run walking. Both of these experiences would have been valuable for me, even though they weren't what I originally intended. Our plan B was to have that extra aid station, which really helped, and for him to meet me at a couple of points and run with me on the trail, particularly the last couple of kilometers, which were the most difficult because I had to go up that damn hill, which was it was really lovely. There wasn't anyone on Box Hill by the time we got up there. This was late in the afternoon. It was really lovely. No one on the Box Hill stairs, no one on the trail going up to where I finished. It was absolutely perfect. And it was really nice to have him there supporting me and running with me at the end. So have your plan B. Have something that makes it easier for you to complete your original goal or have a scaled goal. And again, it's really important to know your guidelines in advance so that you can evaluate when you're feeling down. Because when you're doing these longer adventures, you're going to have down moments. You're going to have moments when it gets hard, when it gets challenging, when you feel like quitting. But knowing your guidelines for quitting will really, really help. And again, giving yourself permission to quit or acknowledging that you have the option to quit is huge. That in and of itself will help you evaluate whether or not you actually want to quit. So now that I've been through this experience and now that I've evaluated my experience, it's going to help me do my next run, which is 50 kilometers. And that's going to make me feel a lot better about running 50 kilometers in April and extending my runs from there. I've actually gotten a lot farther than I thought I was going to get by this point. I really never thought I'd be able to run this event in April. I never thought I could do that. Even last year, it was like this wild dream that I didn't think was possible. So, I got here by putting in the miles and not quitting. But that doesn't mean that quitting isn't a good option sometimes. There are so many good reasons to quit. If you haven't hydrated enough, if you haven't eaten enough, if you haven't trained enough and you've made a giant jump in miles and you're risking injury. There's so many different reasons to quit. So know what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and know when to push yourself and when to give yourself permission to quit. This is super, super important. Now, this episode is a companion episode to next week's episode, which I'm super excited about. Jane Talbot is coming on. She is the woman that I've mentioned a few times. I've worked with her on my sports mindset, and I'm totally confident that the work that I've done with her has been instrumental in getting me to where I am because, like I said, last year, if you had told me that I would be running these distances in February, I never would have believed you. So working on your sports mindset, especially at the subconscious level, can be super, super helpful. She will be coming on to talk about sports mindset and how you can get the mindset you need to have the outdoors adventures that you want. Really excited about this. So this is going to be a short episode today. I just wanted to tell you my story and give you some food for thought before you go on your next outdoor adventure. That's it for now. Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com or find me online and get in touch there. Thank you so much for listening. Next week's episode, as I said, Sports Mindset with Jane Talbot. And in the meantime, remember to visit hollyworton.com/395 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.